The morning sun filtered through the kitchen windows of 847 Oakmont Drive with that perfect autumn glow, the kind that made everything look postcard-ready. Sarah Chen stood at her espresso machine, scrolling through emails while her German shepherd, Maximus, pressed his massive head against her leg, demanding breakfast. She'd bought this house 2 years ago after the divorce. It wasn't the dream home she'd imagined, but it was hers. 3 bedrooms, a renovated kitchen, and most importantly, the pool. She'd learned to swim only at 31 after Mark left. The pool became her therapy, her sanctuary, the place where she felt like she could breathe again. The coffee machine hissed. Sarah poured the espresso, added oat milk, and grabbed her phone to check the time. 7:47 a.m. She had 17 minutes before her first client of the day, a virtual session with a tech startup founder who was having a meltdown about leadership structure. Sarah was a business consultant, the kind of person who fixed other people's disasters for a living. It was ironic, given how spectacularly her own life had fallen apart. Maximus whined, nudging his bowl with his snout. "I know, baby, I know," Sarah said, scratching behind his ears. "Come on." She poured kibble into his ceramic bowl, the expensive kind from that boutique pet store in the city, and he attacked it like he hadn't eaten in weeks. He'd only eaten 2 hours ago. Max was perpetually dramatic, a trait she suspected he'd picked up from her. Her phone buzzed, a text from her mother. "Did you see the HOA email about Corinne Hutchins? She's running for president again. That woman has no sense of shame." Sarah smiled despite herself. The Homeowners Association drama was the neighborhood's primary entertainment source. Corinne Hutchins was the villain everyone loved to hate, a woman in her mid-50s who'd appointed herself the arbiter of everything from lawn maintenance to acceptable trash can colors. She wore designer everything, drove a Range Rover with vanity plates that read Corinne 47, and had a way of making everyone around her feel small. The worst part? They'd been sorority sisters at UC Davis. 30 years of history. 30 years of Corinne being exactly like this, and 30 years of Sarah hopping she'd eventually become a better version of herself. The text thread continued. "She's been making rounds about neighborhood standards. Apparently, she told the Reeves their fence is suburban and uninspiring. Who even talks like that?" Sarah didn't respond. She had work to do, but she made a mental note to text her mother later. That was what they did now after the divorce. They texted. It was their way of staying connected without having to say all the things they were too scared to say out loud. She settled into her home office, a spare bedroom she'd furnished with plants, a good desk, and soft lighting. The Zoom call popped up at exactly 8:00 a.m. For the next hour, she walked a 30-year-old man named Derek through the difference between micromanagement and accountability. It was satisfying work, the kind that paid her bills and gave her a sense of purpose. By 9:30 a.m., she was back in the kitchen, refilling her coffee and opening her laptop to check emails. There were the usual things: invoices to send, a contract to review, a message from her best friend Jamie about drinks on Friday. Then she saw it. An email from the HOA board sent to all residents. The subject line read, "Pool violation notice, 847 Oakmont Drive." Sarah's stomach dropped. She opened it. The email was professional but cold, the kind of communication that made her feel like she was being called to the principal's office. "Dear Ms. Chen, it has come to our attention that your pool is being used for unauthorized purposes during evening hours. Specifically, lights have been observed on at irregular times, and there have been reports of splashing sounds after neighborhood quiet hours, 10 p.m. The pool must comply with all neighborhood guidelines, including restrictions on late-night usage. Excessive evening pool activity creates light pollution and noise disturbances. A formal inspection will take place this week. If violations are confirmed, fines up to $500 will be assessed. Please acknowledge receipt of this notice." It was signed by Corinne Hutchins, HOA president. Sarah read it 3 times. Her heart was hammering. She hadn't used the pool in the evening for weeks. The rain had been too cold. Besides, she always kept the lights off at night. She was religious about quiet hours. The whole neighborhood probably thought she was a psychopath for never hosting pool parties, for never making a sound. She grabbed her phone and texted Jamie. "Emergency drinks moved to tonight." Jamie responded in seconds. "What happened?" "Corinne happened." The response came back as just an eye-roll emoji. Sarah set her phone down and stared at the email. Her hands were shaking. It felt personal, even though she tried to convince herself it wasn't. It probably wasn't. Karen probably sent complaint emails to half the neighborhood. That was just who she was, a woman who looked for problems so she could feel important. But something in the email's tone, the precision of it, the specificity of the splashing sounds after quiet hours, made Sarah feel targeted. It made her feel like Karen was standing outside her property line, watching. She opened her laptop and checked the date on the email. It had been sent at 2:37 a.m. Who checks for neighborhood violations at 2:37 a.m.? Sarah made a decision. She spent the next hour sending emails to the other HOA board members, politely requesting a copy of whatever complaint had been filed. She kept her tone professional, even friendly. But she was building a record. She was documenting this moment, the moment Karen decided to make her life difficult. By evening, she was wrung out. The day had been productive, 2 more client calls, 1 invoice sent, 3 potential leads, but she couldn't shake the anxiety. It sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. She fed Maximus dinner, changed into her workout clothes, and headed to the pool. It was barely 8 p.m., plenty of time before quiet hours. The sun was just starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She'd installed solar lights along the deck specifically so she could swim in the evening without feeling like she was violating some unwritten rule. She swam for 45 minutes, laps back and forth. The familiar rhythm of it, stroke, breathe, turn, repeat, gradually began to loosen the knot in her chest. By the time she pulled herself out of the water, she felt almost human again. She was wrapping a towel around herself when her phone buzzed. Another text from her mother. I heard from Patricia. She said Karen was asking about your pool last week. At the book club, that woman is unhinged, be careful. Sarah stared at that message for a long time. Patricia was Karen's closest friend in the neighborhood. If Karen had been asking about Sarah's pool at book club, then this wasn't random. This wasn't standard HOA business. The inspection happened on a Thursday. A man named Roger from the city came to the house at 10 a.m., clipboard in hand, walking around the pool with the kind of bored efficiency that suggested he'd done this 1,000 times before. Sarah followed him around, pointing out that everything was perfectly maintained. The water chemistry was balanced. The drain was clean. There were no violations, had never been violations. She'd been meticulous about that from day one. Roger nodded, made notes, and left after 20 minutes. He didn't say whether she was in the clear or not. Will I hear back? Sarah asked as he walked to his truck. City'll send you a report in about 10 days. Most of this stuff never amounts to anything, he said, which was supposed to be reassuring but wasn't. That evening, Sarah did something she'd been avoiding. She Googled Karen Hutchins and spent an hour falling down a rabbit hole of HOA meeting minutes, neighborhood Facebook groups, and archived blog posts that Karen had written about community standards. What she found disturbed her. Karen had been HOA president for 7 years. In that time, she'd initiated 15 formal investigations into neighborhood violations. 15. Of those, only 3 had resulted in actual fines. The others had been, inconclusive, dropped. But the complaints themselves had served their purpose. They'd made people miserable. Sarah found a Reddit thread from 2 years ago, r/HOA horror. Someone had posted about Karen Hutchins. Our HOA president is on a power trip and uses violations as her personal weapon. I painted my fence a color I liked. She filed a complaint. I had my sister stay with us for a week. She complained about cars in my driveway. When the city investigated, they found nothing. But the point was already made. She'd flexed her power. Don't move to Oakmont if you value your sanity. The post had 4.2K upvotes. Sarah closed the browser and poured herself a glass of wine. The next day, Friday, she met Jamie at their favorite bar, a craft cocktail place in the city that required reservations and had pretentious bartenders who made drinks that tasted like flowers and dreams. She's terrorizing me, Sarah said, 3 sips into a gin and elderflower concoction. Karen has been terrorizing everyone since I've known you, Jamie said, stirring her margarita with a tiny bamboo stick. Remember when she complained that your Christmas lights were too avant-garde and lacked traditional warmth? That was specifically insane. Completely insane. But also you can't let her live in your head rent-free. That's what she wants. Sarah knew Jamie was right. but knowing and doing were different things. Over the weekend, Sarah found herself checking the HOA Facebook group obsessively, looking for any new posts about violations or complaints. She attended the Sunday neighborhood coffee at the community center just to listen to conversations and understand what people were saying about her. Nothing really. People were friendly. They had no idea what was happening. As far as they knew, Sarah was the quiet woman who'd recently divorced, kept to herself, and had a beautiful pool she never used. When she got home, she pulled up the city's inspection system online and checked for results on her case. Still pending. She was waiting for a verdict that hadn't been decided yet. On Monday, she got an email from the HOA. A second one, this time about her landscaping. Dear Ms. Chen, the hedges along your property line have been observed to exceed the recommended height of 6 feet. Please trim them within the next 2 weeks. Failure to comply will result in a $250 fine. Again signed by Karen Hutchins. Sarah went outside with a measuring tape. Her hedges were exactly 511. She got her phone and called the HOA office. It was run by a third-party management company, not Karen directly, but Karen was the one fielding complaints. A woman named Patricia answered, a different Patricia from book club, hopefully. I'm calling about a landscaping violation notice I received, Sarah said, keeping her voice professional. I've measured my hedges. They're 511. That's under the limit. There was a long pause. Let me look at your file, Patricia said. Sarah could hear typing. Okay, yes, I see the notice. It came from the board president. Let me. Have you send me a photo of the hedges with the measurement visible? I can flag this for review. I should have to send proof that I'm not breaking the rules, Sarah said quietly. I know, Patricia said, and Sarah heard genuine sympathy in her voice. I'll make a note about that. Send me the photo anyway, just to have on file. Sarah took the photo, timestamp visible, measurement clearly marked, and sent it that afternoon. She didn't hear back for 3 days. When Patricia finally replied, it was a short email. Violation dismissed, no action required. But by then, Sarah was already researching Karen's past. She'd called her mother and asked questions. She'd reached out to Jamie and asked what she knew. Slowly, a picture emerged. Karen's first marriage had ended 15 years ago. Her ex-husband had left her for a younger woman. The woman happened to live 5 houses down from Karen. Every time Karen saw them together, she had to see the life she'd lost. The neighbors said Karen had become obsessed with standards around that same time, like if she could control the neighborhood, she could control something in her life. Karen's second marriage lasted 6 years. It had ended with her moving into the HOA presidency like it was a new role in a play she'd already rehearsed. Control the space, monitor the boundaries, punish any deviation from the rules. Sarah understood trauma. She understood how pain could distort you into something unrecognizable, but understanding didn't make it hurt less. She started keeping a notebook. Every email from the HOA, she documented the date and content. Every observation about Karen, she noted it. She was building a case, though she wasn't entirely sure against what or for whom. In the second week of October, Sarah got the inspection report from the city. Roger had filed it. His conclusion was clear. No violations found, property in compliance with all municipal codes. She felt a surge of vindication that lasted approximately 4 hours. Then, on her daily check of the HOA Facebook group, she saw a post from Karen. Reminder to all residents, just because the city says something is okay doesn't mean it's in keeping with our community standards. We have the right to enforce our bylaws, which are often stricter than city code. Let's keep our neighborhood beautiful. Let's keep standards high. It had 14 comments. Most of them were agreeing. A few were ambiguous. One was from a woman named Susan. Karen, are you talking about anyone in particular? Because this feels passive-aggressive. Karen's response came immediately. Of course not, Susan. Just a general reminder. We're all neighbors here. Green heart. The green heart emoji made Sarah feel sick. She was being publicly humiliated, and no one was seeing it except her. That night she lay in bed unable to sleep. Max was curled up on the foot of the bed, snoring softly. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet and dark. Inside her head, it was a hurricane. She thought about reaching out to Karen directly, asking her what was happening. But she already knew the answer. Karen would deny everything, paint herself as a victim, claim Sarah was being paranoid and aggressive. She thought about confronting her at a neighborhood event, but that would only give Karen ammunition, proof that Sarah was unstable or hostile. She thought about going public with it, posting her own thing on the Facebook group. But she could already imagine how that would look. Sarah Chen, newly divorced, making accusations against the HOA president. People would choose to believe Karen. People always did. So instead, Sarah did what she did best. She documented, she researched, she built her understanding of the enemy. 2 weeks passed without new violations. Sarah had begun to hope that Karen had lost interest, that maybe she'd moved on to terrorizing someone else, but she should have known better. Karen was patient. Karen was strategic. On a Tuesday night, Sarah was in her office finishing up a client call when her security system buzzed. Someone was at the gate. She checked the camera feed, a delivery driver holding a package. Sarah hadn't ordered anything recently, but occasionally clients sent gifts. She buzzed the driver through and watched via the camera as he walked up to her front door, left the package, and left. She went to retrieve it. Inside was a set of decorative solar lights in a shade of blue that was absolutely gorgeous, but completely outside the neighborhood's approved color palette. The invoice inside read, "Gift from Karen HUTCHINS. Consider this encouragement to beautify your landscape." Sarah's hands went cold. She called Jamie immediately. "She's insane," Jamie said. "She sent you lights so she could report you for using them." "That's what this is. She's trying to trap me. She wants to document me violating the rules." "Screenshot everything. Document this. This is actually evidence of something." Sarah spent the next hour photographing the lights, the invoice, the box, the shipping label, everything. She emailed it all to herself with timestamps. Then she carefully packed everything back into the box, sealed it, and didn't open it again. She also changed her security system settings, activating the 24-hour recording feature. If Karen was going to try to catch her doing something wrong, Sarah would be ready to prove her innocence. The next morning, Sarah got an email from the HOA. "Dear Ms. Chen, we received a complaint regarding newly installed landscape lighting on your property. While solar lights are permitted, the color of the lights must comply with neighborhood standards. Blue-tinted outdoor lighting is not approved. Please remove these lights within 48 hours or face a $500 fine." Sarah almost laughed. It was so transparent it was almost beautiful in its shamelessness. She sent a response to the HOA board, copying the management company. "The lights were received as a gift from HOA President Karen Hutchins and have never been installed or used. I have documentation of the shipment and am happy to provide it. I request that this complaint be reviewed for validity given the source." Patricia from the management company responded within an hour. "Ms. Chen, I've reviewed your documentation. This complaint is being dismissed and flagged as a misuse of HOA authority. I will be discussing this with the other board members." But Sarah knew what would happen next. Karen would claim she was just being friendly and thoughtful. She'd say it was all a misunderstanding. She'd probably cry a little bit during the board meeting. And by the end of it, Karen would still be the president and Sarah would still be the problem. The dynamic had become clear to her. Karen had all the power and could afford to use it badly. Sarah had none of the power and had to be perfect to avoid being punished. It was a game Sarah couldn't win. So Sarah decided to stop playing. She started going to HOA meetings, not to participate, just to observe. She sat in the back of the room in the community center conference room and watched as Karen ran meetings like she was a dictator running a particularly tedious country. She listened to Karen approve her own budget increase without proper voting procedures. She watched as Karen shut down legitimate questions about financial transparency by saying, "That's not how we do things here." She noticed that Karen always had allies, 3 other board members who seemed to nod along with everything she said. But she also noticed that there were fractures. Susan, the woman who'd called her out on Facebook, looked angry most of the time. Another board member named David was clearly uncomfortable with how Karen ran things. After the meeting on October 29th, Sarah approached them in the parking lot. "Hey, I'm Sarah Chen. I live at 847 Oakmont." Susan turned, and Sarah could see something shift in her expression. A softening, a recognition that this was the woman Karen had been targeting. "I know who you are," Susan said. "I'm sorry about all of this." I'm not here to complain, Sarah said, which was a lie. She absolutely was here to complain. I'm here to ask if anyone else has noticed how the complaints against me have nothing to do with actual violations. David and Susan exchanged a look. It's not just you, David said quietly. Corinne's been like this for years. She uses the HOA to push around whoever she's decided to push around, but honestly, it's hard to stop her. She has the votes. You could vote her out, Sarah said. Not without more people on the board being willing to go against her. And that's not how neighborhoods work. People don't want to make waves. Sarah nodded. She understood. Confrontation was the price of being reasonable in a world where other people were not. Okay, she said. Thank you for being honest with me. She drove home thinking about her options. They were limited. She could lawyer up and send a cease and desist, but that would only accelerate things. She could move, but she loved her house and her pool. She could try to rally the neighborhood, but that would make her look crazy to people who were already predisposed to assume she was difficult. Or she could wait and hope that Corinne eventually lost interest. But Sarah had never been good at waiting. That night, she made a decision that she didn't quite admit to herself she was making. She removed the security recording from her house surveillance system and backed it up to an encrypted cloud storage. She documented every email from the HOA, every complaint. She organized everything chronologically, making note of patterns. Then she did something she was less proud of. She called a journalist. Her brother-in-law worked at the local newspaper, the Oakmont Gazette. It wasn't a big publication, but it was something. She left a message on his voicemail. Hi, Mark, it's Sarah. I might have a story for you. It's about HOA abuse of power. Can you call me back? He called her the next day. What's going on? Mark asked. Your brother said you sounded upset. Sarah had called her ex-husband's brother for help. The irony wasn't lost on her, but she was past caring about irony. She was in survival mode. She told him everything. The inspection that found no violations, the gifts as traps, the complaints about things that didn't exist, the pattern of targeting her specifically. This is one person's complaints, though, Mark said carefully. HOA boards have legitimate authority to. It's not legitimate authority when it's being weaponized, Sarah interrupted. And it's only against me because she has a personal grudge. Look, I don't want you to print anything that would make me look vindictive, but I want people to know this is happening. I want documentation of what an HOA president can get away with. Mark was quiet for a moment. Let me look into it. I can't promise anything, but I'll do some digging. The ball was in motion now. Sarah had no way to stop it, and she wasn't sure if she should. Over the next week, she threw herself into client work, refusing to think about what might come next. She swam every evening, right at 8 p.m., so that anyone watching would see her following the rules. She kept her landscaping immaculate. She smiled when she ran into neighbors. She was being perfect, which made her feel like she was disappearing. On November 5th, Mark called. I got some interesting information, he said. Corinne Hutchins has been HOA president for 7 years. During that time, her neighborhood has had more violation complaints than any other HOA development in the county. Most of them get dismissed or don't hold up to scrutiny. I talked to a few people off the record. There's a pattern of her targeting specific residents, usually ones she has some kind of personal conflict with. Are you going to write about it? Sarah asked. I can write about HOA abuse patterns in general, Mark said. I can't single her out without more proof, but if you're comfortable with being a source, I could interview you specifically about what you've experienced. I can keep you somewhat anonymous if you want. Sarah thought about this. Being anonymous would defeat the purpose. If she was going to do this, she needed to do it all the way. No anonymous, Sarah said. Use my name, use my story. The article came out on November 8th, a Thursday. It was front-page news for the Oakmont Gazette, not huge, but prominent. HOA president accused of selective enforcement, the headline read. The article detailed the pattern of complaints against Sarah, the ones that didn't hold up to inspection, the gift trap incident. It included quotes from David and Susan. It included quotes from the Reddit user who'd posted about Corinne 2 years ago. And it included Corinne's comment. I categorically deny these allegations. I take my responsibilities as HOA president very seriously and would never abuse my authority. By Friday morning, the neighborhood was talking about nothing else. Sarah's phone rang constantly. Neighbors she'd barely spoken to were calling to express support. The community Facebook group exploded with comments. People were sharing their own stories about Karen's aggressive enforcement tactics. Others were defending her. The most interesting comments came from people who'd apparently been researching the financial records of the HOA. Questions were being raised about where the fines had gone, about budget discrepancies, about decisions made without proper voting procedures. Karen had given people a reason to look closely, and now they were looking. Sarah watched it unfold with a mix of satisfaction and dread. She'd opened a door that she wasn't sure how to close. The community center was packed. Sarah had never seen more than 20 people at an HOA meeting. Today there were over 100. The energy in the room was tense, charged with the electricity of people who'd been given permission to be angry. Karen sat at the front of the room, her face perfectly composed, her hair perfect, her outfit perfect. She looked like she was about to close a real estate deal, not defend her integrity. David called the meeting to order. He'd apparently taken over as interim moderator, given the conflict of interest. We're here because recent allegations have been raised about how HOA authority is being used, David began. The board requested a special meeting to address these concerns directly. Karen, would you like to make a statement? Karen stood up. She looked around the room with an expression of wounded nobility that Sarah almost had to admire. It was Oscar-level performance. I want to say first that I've dedicated 7 years of my life to this neighborhood, Karen began, her voice steady and hurt. I've worked unpaid, volunteering my time and energy to keep our community beautiful and our standards high. I've made decisions that I believed were in the best interest of all of us. And yes, I've filed complaints about violations I've observed. That's literally my job. But did you send someone lights specifically so you could report them for installing the lights? A man in the audience called out. That's a misinterpretation of a kind gesture, Karen said. I sent Sarah lights because I thought they were beautiful and would enhance her property. If there was a misunderstanding about color regulations, that's unfortunate, but... You knew, Sarah said. She stood up from where she'd been sitting in the back. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. You knew the blue lights weren't approved. That was the entire point. You were setting a trap. Karen's expression tightened, but she recovered quickly. That's a serious accusation, and I think you need to be careful about the claims you're making, Sarah. I'm sorry you feel targeted, but I'm also sorry that you're trying to make this neighborhood drama into something it's not. It's not drama, Sarah said, walking to the front. She had everyone's attention now. It's a pattern, and I have documentation of all of it. As does the city inspector, Susan interjected from the board. He found no violations at Ms. Chen's property, as does the management company, which dismissed the landscaping complaint. We also have records showing that most of the complaints filed about Ms. Chen's property were about issues that either didn't exist or were outside HOA jurisdiction. The point is, Karen said, her voice rising slightly, I was doing my job. If some of my decisions didn't pan out, that's the nature of governance. You can't please everyone. But this isn't about pleasing everyone, a woman named Margaret said, standing up. She lived 2 blocks over from Sarah. This is about you using your position to harass someone you have a personal grudge against. My husband works in law. What you've done could constitute abuse of authority. It could be considered harassment. The room erupted. Some people were defending Karen. Others were furious with her. Most of them looked stunned that something they'd thought of as boring HOA business could turn into something this ugly. David called for order. Regardless of past decisions, moving forward, we need to establish new governance protocols. We're implementing a mandatory second review for all complaints. All fines require a majority vote. All decisions made by the president must be documented and reviewed by the full board. You're overturning my authority, Karen said, her voice sharp. We're establishing checks and balances, David said. That's what should have been there all along. The meeting continued for another hour, becoming increasingly procedural. By the end, the board had essentially dismantled most of Karen's power. She could still file complaints, but they would be reviewed by other people. She could still propose fines, but they would require a vote. The dictatorship was over. When the meeting ended, Sarah expected Karen to storm out. Instead, Karen approached her in the parking lot. You wanted this, Karen said quietly, just the two of them, the October wind swirling around them. You wanted to humiliate me. No, Sarah said, and she meant it. I just wanted you to stop. I was trying to help this neighborhood maintain standards, Karen said. I care about where I live. Is that so wrong? Sarah looked at her, really looked at her. Karen was a woman in her mid-50s, carefully put together, desperately trying to control something because everything else in her life had fallen apart. Sarah understood that. She understood it deeply. Karen, you can care about the neighborhood and not terrorize people, Sarah said quietly. You can have standards without using them as a weapon, but you chose to target me specifically. You chose to see me as an enemy instead of just someone living her life. You were different, Karen said, and there was something raw in her voice that hadn't been there before. After everything happened with my marriage and then the divorce, you were always the one who had it together. You were always so competent and happy. And then you got divorced too, and I thought maybe it was different when life actually knocked you down. Sarah felt a flash of pity that surprised her. It wasn't, Sarah said. Life knocked me down hard, but I didn't get to stay down. I had to get back up. I'm still getting back up. Karen looked away. I owe you an apology. Yes, Sarah said, you do. I'm sorry, Karen said, and she sounded like she meant it, though Sarah had learned that apologies could be meaningless, could be another performance. I should have never done those things. I should have never tried to hurt you. Sarah nodded. Neither of them said anything else. Karen eventually turned and walked to her Range Rover. Sarah watched her drive away, and she thought about forgiveness and how complicated it was. But she didn't forgive Karen. Not yet, not tonight. She was still holding on to the anger because it was what had saved her. Anger had made her fight back. Anger had made her document everything. Anger had made her refuse to be invisible. She would forgive Karen later, maybe, when the wounds had scabbed over and she could see the woman as just another broken person trying to glue herself back together. The weeks that followed were strange and anticlimactic in a way that didn't match the drama that had preceded them. Karen stopped coming to HOA meetings. She stopped filing complaints. She stopped being a visible presence in the neighborhood's Facebook group. Sarah would see her occasionally, getting into her Range Rover or walking along the street with a designer bag, but Karen would never make eye contact. The dynamic had completely shifted. Karen was now the person people whispered about, the woman who'd been exposed. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Sarah felt hollow. She'd won, but the neighborhood had been fractured in the process. There were people who thought Sarah was cruel for taking Karen down. There were people defending Karen, saying she'd only been trying to do her job. The community had sorted itself into factions, and it was uncomfortable for everyone. The newspaper article had had more consequences than Sarah had anticipated. A local news station had picked it up, and suddenly Oakmont was famous for all the wrong reasons. Affluent neighborhood torn apart by HOA president abuse was the headline they used. Mark, her brother-in-law, had seemed genuinely troubled by how big the story had gotten. I was just trying to shine a light on a legitimate issue, he'd told her over coffee. I didn't think it would blow up like this. I'm glad it did, Sarah had said at the time. But now, in late November, she wasn't entirely sure. The thing about winning a fight is that you still have to live in the same town as the person you defeated. You still have to see them. And if you're a decent person, you still have to think about them. Sarah was thinking about Karen constantly, but not the Karen from the last few weeks, the scheming, ambitious Karen who'd tried to trap her. Sarah was thinking about the broken woman in the parking lot, the woman who'd admitted that she'd targeted Sarah because she envied her. On November 20th, Sarah did something she would have called insane a month earlier. She drove to Karen's house. It was a beautiful place, larger than Sarah's, with immaculate landscaping and a fountain out front. Of course, Karen's house looked perfect. Karen's entire identity was built on looking perfect. Sarah knocked on the door, her heart hammering. Karen answered after a moment, wearing yoga clothes and no makeup, the first time Sarah had ever seen her looking anything less than carefully composed. For a second, Karen didn't recognize her. Then her face went pale. I'm not here to fight, Sarah said quickly. Can we talk, like actually talk? Karen looked like she wanted to close the door, but something in her expression shifted, and she stepped back to let Sarah inside. The interior of Karen's house was exactly what Sarah expected, all designer furniture and carefully curated art. It looked like a magazine spread, which meant it also looked sterile and kind of sad. They sat in Karen's living room. There was a silence that stretched out between them, awkward and heavy. "I came to tell you something," Sarah said. "I'm not the person you thought I was. I'm not perfect. I'm not someone who had it together. I'm someone whose marriage ended because my husband stopped loving me, or maybe stopped trying to love me. I'm someone who had to move to a new house and start over from scratch because I couldn't afford to stay in the place where we used to be happy. I'm someone who almost had a panic attack every time I opened an email from the HOA because I was so afraid of you." Karen was looking down at her hands. "I'm sorry," Karen said. "I know you are," Sarah said, "but I wanted you to understand something. You targeted me because you thought I had something you didn't, and the truth is I did. I had peace. I had moved past my divorce and was building something new, and you wanted to destroy that because your own life was still broken." "Yes," Karen said quietly. "But here's the thing," Sarah continued. "Destroying me wouldn't have fixed you. It wouldn't have made your marriages less painful or your life less lonely. It just would have made you feel temporarily powerful. And then the next day, you'd still be broken." Karen looked up at her with tears in her eyes. "I know," she said. "I know that now." "I want you to do something," Sarah said. "I want you to resign from the HOA, not because of what happened to you, but because you shouldn't have that power. Not right now. Not while you're this wounded. You need to take care of yourself before you're responsible for taking care of a community." "I was going to resign anyway," Karen said. "I sent an email to the board yesterday. I'm stepping down at the end of the month." Sarah felt something shift in her chest. "Okay," she said. "I'm also considering therapy," Karen added. "Actual therapy with a real therapist, not just complaining about my problems to people at book club." "That's good," Sarah said. "That would be really good." They sat in silence for a few more minutes. It wasn't comfortable, but it was gentler than it had been. "I do forgive you," Sarah said finally. "I want you to know that, not because what you did was okay, but because holding on to this anger is only hurting me and I'm done giving you that power." Karen was crying openly now, not in a dramatic way, but in the way people cry when they realize what they've lost and what they've destroyed. "I don't deserve your forgiveness," Karen said. "Probably not," Sarah agreed. "But I'm giving it to you anyway, and I hope you'll give it to yourself eventually." Sarah left Karen's house feeling lighter than she had in weeks. Not because everything was resolved. It wasn't. Not because she was happy. She was still processing the entire situation. But because she'd broken the cycle of retaliation and revenge. She'd chosen mercy instead. That night, Sarah sat on her pool deck as the sun set. Max was beside her, his massive head resting on her lap. She swam a few laps, then floated on her back, staring up at the darkening sky. The pool had started this entire situation. Or rather, Karen's obsession with the pool had. But the pool was also what had saved her, the place where she'd gone to heal, to think, to find herself again after the divorce. Sarah thought about what it meant to win. She'd beaten Karen, exposed her, stripped her of her power. But what had that actually accomplished? A fractured neighborhood, a woman spiraling deeper into her despair, a news story that had made everyone in town uncomfortable. Was that victory, or was it just a different kind of loss? By November 25th, the chaos had largely died down. The board had put in new protocols. David was serving as interim president while they worked on selecting someone new. Karen had officially resigned, sending a brief, formal email to all residents that said she was stepping down to focus on personal matters. No one was surprised. The news cycle had moved on to other stories. Local politics, holiday preparations, the usual end-of-year content. The scandal of the Oakmont HOA had already been eclipsed by more recent dramas. Sarah's life returned to something resembling normal. She worked. She swam. She had dinner with Jamie. She was present but distant, like she was still processing something she didn't quite have words for. On the evening of November 30th, as Sarah was closing up her office, her phone buzzed. A text from a number she didn't recognize. "This is Karen. I wanted you to know that I've scheduled appointments with a therapist and a divorce recovery coach. I'm going to get help. I'm going to fix what I broke inside myself. I don't expect you to care about this, but I needed you to know that your forgiveness made me want to be better. Thank you for being kind when you didn't have to be." Sarah stared at that message for a long time. She thought about texting back, but she wasn't sure what to say. So instead, she took a screenshot, documentation of the moment everything had shifted, and then she deleted the message from her phone. That night she swam in the darkness with just the solar lights to guide her. The water was cold, the sky was clear, the neighborhood was quiet. She'd survived something, she'd stood up for herself, she'd exposed injustice. She'd also destroyed someone's power and her place in the community. She'd extended mercy to someone who hadn't earned it. All of these things were true at the same time. As Sarah climbed out of the pool, shivering but calm, she realized that the story wasn't over. Stories like this never really ended. Karen would get therapy and would heal, or she wouldn't. The neighborhood would move forward, or it would stay fractured. Sarah would continue living her life, continuing to grow, continuing to find peace in this house and this pool and this body of water that reflected the sky. By the end of February, winter had loosened its grip on Oakmont, and spring was beginning to assert itself with crocuses and daffodils pushing through the thawing earth. Sarah had returned to her routine with a kind of deliberate purposefulness. Work, swimming, meals with friends, early mornings with Maximus. The neighborhood had settled into its new normal. David had been officially elected as HOA president and was running things with a refreshing lack of drama. The board had established the checks and balances that should have been there all along. Financial transparency was now the rule rather than the exception. Sarah had received an email from Susan about a neighborhood garden project that had made her smile. The community was finding reasons to come together that didn't involve conflict or comparison. Karen hadn't appeared in the neighborhood for weeks. Sarah had assumed she'd either moved away or had become a permanent recluse. Either way, the two of them weren't running into each other anymore. Then, on an unseasonably warm Saturday in late February, Sarah went to a coffee shop in the city, not her usual spot, but one closer to Jamie's office, and found Karen sitting at a table by the window, reading a book on mindfulness and meditation. Their eyes met. There was a moment of tension, a question about whether they would acknowledge each other. Then Karen smiled, a real, non-performed smile, and gestured to the empty chair at her table. Sarah hesitated, then sat down. "Hi," Karen said. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk to me." "I'm not sure either," Sarah said honestly, "but here we are." "I've been seeing a therapist," Karen said. "Twice a week. I'm working through a lot of stuff, the divorces, the need to control things, the fact that I've been a really terrible person to a lot of people over the years." "How's that going?" Sarah asked. "It's hard," Karen said, "but in a good way, like it's hard but it matters. Does that make sense?" Sarah nodded. "I've also been thinking about you," Karen continued. "About how you showed up at my house and forgave me when you absolutely didn't have to. I think about that moment at least once a day. I've been trying to understand why you did that." "Honestly," Sarah said, "I'm not entirely sure. I think I did it for me more than for you. I couldn't live with being angry anymore." "Well, it worked," Karen said. "It made me want to actually change instead of just apologizing and hoping everyone would move on." They sat in silence for a moment, sipping their coffee. "I resigned from the HOA," Karen said. "Did you know that?" "Yes," Sarah said. "I'm not coming back," Karen continued. "Even when I've worked through my stuff, I don't think I should have that kind of power. I think I used it in ways that were harmful, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life being aware of that." Sarah appreciated that Karen wasn't trying to be absolved of this. She was acknowledging it as part of her ongoing responsibility. "What are you doing now?" Sarah asked. "I'm taking a leave from my job. I work in real estate. I know, very on-brand. But I'm reconsidering whether that's what I want to do. The whole thing is about controlling people and pushing them into transactions that might not be in their best interest. I'm wondering if maybe I should do something different, something that actually helps people instead of just making money off of them." "That's good," Sarah said. "I also wanted to say that I'm sorry," Karen said. "I know I said that before, but I mean it differently now. I'm not sorry for you. I'm sorry because I genuinely regret the pain I caused you and the time I wasted on being bitter about my own life." Sarah thought about whether she wanted to forgive this Karen, the one who was doing the work, who was genuinely changing. She realized she already had. Somewhere in the last 3 months, she'd let go of the anger completely. "I forgive you," Sarah said. "Completely, no caveats." Karen's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "That means a lot," she said. They talked for another hour. Real conversation, not the defensive sparring of two women trying to outmaneuver each other. Corinne asked Sarah about her work, her life, how she was doing post-divorce. Sarah asked Corinne about therapy, about what she was learning about herself. By the time they left the coffee shop, something had shifted. Not a friendship, they weren't going to be friends, but perhaps a peaceful coexistence based on genuine understanding rather than fear. As Sarah walked to her car, she thought about how life could do that, take the worst moment and transform it into something unexpected. The crisis with Corinne had been awful, but it had also cracked something open in both of them. Corinne would probably spend the rest of her life being aware of how she'd used power to hurt people. She'd probably never fully get over that guilt, and maybe that was okay. Maybe that was exactly what she needed, to understand the consequences of her actions so deeply that it changed her fundamentally. And Sarah had learned something too. She'd learned that she wasn't powerless. She could speak up. She could stand up for herself. She could pursue justice and forgiveness at the same time. She'd also learned that people could change. Corinne wasn't the same woman who'd sent hostile emails and set traps with solar lights. She was becoming something different. Whether that was redemption or just damage control, Sarah wasn't entirely sure. But it was change, and change was something. By mid-March, Oakmont had moved into full spring. The pool was warming up. Sarah had started swimming again with real frequency, falling back into her routine of evening laps and meditation floating on her back. One evening, as she was getting out of the pool, she noticed something strange. There was a figure standing at her fence, a woman with dark hair, not particularly distinctive. Sarah didn't recognize her immediately. Then the woman turned, and Sarah realized it was Corinne's ex-husband's new girlfriend. The woman Corinne had been obsessed with years ago, the visual reminder of everything Corinne had lost. Sarah froze. This was potentially about to be something ugly. But then the woman smiled and waved. "I'm sorry to bother you," the woman called out. "I'm visiting someone in the neighborhood and I saw your pool. It's beautiful." "Thank you," Sarah said cautiously. "Corinne and I are actually on pretty good terms now," the woman added. "We ran into each other at the grocery store a few weeks ago and we've actually been having coffee. She apologized for some terrible behavior I never even knew about. It was so gracious of her." Sarah felt something release in her chest. "That's good," she said. "That's really good to hear." The woman left, and Sarah finished changing out of her wet clothes. She drove home feeling like she'd witnessed something important, evidence that Corinne was actually following through on her commitment to change. By the time spring had turned to early summer, Sarah had begun dating again. It wasn't serious. A guy named Thomas who worked in marketing and was kind and didn't bring any of his emotional baggage into the relationship, at least not yet. They had dinner occasionally. They went to movies. It was pleasant and uncomplicated. Her business was thriving. She'd taken on 2 new consulting contracts and was considering hiring an assistant. Life was good. And Maximus had developed a new trick. Whenever someone approached the pool gate without permission, he'd go absolutely bonkers, jumping and barking. His alarm system had been instrumental in exposing Corinne that terrible night months ago. Now he was her protector, her early warning system, her friend. One evening in June, as Sarah was hosting Jamie over for a backyard dinner by the pool, she found herself telling the whole story again. Not because Jamie didn't know it, but because Sarah needed to process it one more time. "You know what the craziest part is?" Sarah said, sipping her wine. "I think Corinne and I might actually become friends eventually, not best friends or anything, but real friends, people who understand each other because we've both been broken and are trying to put ourselves back together." "That's very enlightened of you," Jamie said. "Most people would avoid her forever." "I would have too," Sarah said. "But something changed when I forgave her. It was like I gave her permission to change and she actually took it. She's doing the work." "Or she's performing recovery for you because she feels guilty," Jamie suggested. "Maybe," Sarah said. "But even if that's true, at least she's performing recovery instead of performing power. That's progress." By August, Sarah ran into Corinne at the grocery store. They hugged, an awkward, brief hug, but a hug nonetheless. They made plans to get coffee again, and both of them actually showed up. The friendship that developed wasn't intense or all-consuming. They weren't calling each other every day or sharing secrets over margaritas, but they did develop a rapport based on genuine understanding. Corinne had left her real estate job and was now working with a nonprofit that helped people navigate divorce recovery. She seemed genuinely fulfilled by the work. She'd started dating a woman named Michelle, which had surprised Sarah until she realized it shouldn't have. Corinne's marriages had ended for a reason, and maybe she'd been looking for love in the wrong places. By October, exactly 1 year after the entire situation had begun, Sarah threw a small gathering at her house. She invited Jamie, David from the HOA, Susan, and even Corinne. They sat by the pool as the sun set, drinking wine and watching Maximus chase fireflies. It was one of those perfect autumn evenings where the year feels like it's coming full circle. "I want to say something," Sarah said at one point, raising her glass. "A year ago, this pool was a source of stress and conflict. It was a symbol of all the things that were wrong in my life and my neighborhood. But now it's just what it was supposed to be all along, a place where people can gather and be happy." Everyone raised their glasses. "To second chances," Corinne said quietly. "To growth," Susan added. "To peace," Jamie said. They clinked glasses, and in that moment Sarah felt the weight of the entire past year release from her shoulders. She'd survived something. She'd stood up for herself. She'd extended mercy. She'd been forgiven and had done the forgiving. She'd learned that people were more complicated than she'd thought. That resolution wasn't neat. That healing wasn't linear. Most importantly, she'd learned that even in the darkness of conflict and anger, there could be light. Not the kind of light that erased what had happened, but the kind that illuminated a path forward. As night fell and the stars came out, Sarah looked at the people gathered by her pool, people who'd been enemies, strangers, and were now something else, something better. And she understood, finally, that this was what victory looked like. Not the defeat of an enemy, but the transformation of anger into understanding. Not the destruction of an opponent, but the possibility of redemption for everyone involved. Not the end of a story, but the beginning of something new. 5 years later, Sarah's business had expanded enough that she'd rented an office space in the city. She had 3 employees. She was making good money and doing work that genuinely helped people figure out their professional lives. She and Thomas had broken up amicably after 2 years. They were still friendly, but had discovered they wanted different things. Sarah had dated a few other people since then, but hadn't found anyone worth changing her life for, and she was okay with that. Maximus was older now, graying around the muzzle, but still fiercely protective and still capable of magnificent alarm barking when anyone approached the pool gate without permission. The Oakmont neighborhood had settled into a comfortable stability. The HOA ran with transparency and genuine community interest. Board elections happened every 2 years without drama. The rules were clear and fairly enforced. Corinne and Michelle had gotten married in a small ceremony. Sarah had been invited, and she'd gone. They'd become genuine friends in that cautious, deliberate way that people become friends when they've survived conflict together. Corinne had continued her work with the divorce recovery nonprofit and had even started a support group that met monthly. She was genuinely helping people navigate the same pain she'd experienced. The transformation that had started with her therapy and Sarah's forgiveness had become a permanent part of who she was. One evening on a warm June night, Sarah invited the neighborhood over for a pool party. It was casual and unpretentious, just neighbors gathering to celebrate the summer. Corinne came along with Michelle. Jamie came with her new husband. David and Susan came. Almost 30 people ended up there, eating food and swimming and laughing. At one point, Sarah stood on the deck watching everyone, and Corinne came and stood beside her. "I think about that night all the time," Corinne said, "when the alarm went off and I got caught." "I know," Sarah said. "I think I needed to get caught," Corinne continued. "If that alarm hadn't gone off, I probably would have kept doing what I was doing. I would have kept hurting you. I would have kept hurting myself." "Maximus saved us both," Sarah said, and she wasn't even being ironic. The dog really had. His alarm had exposed Corinne's actions, which had forced everything into the open, which had made change possible. "I'm grateful," Corinne said simply, "for the alarm, for you, for the chance to become someone better." Sarah squeezed her hand. "I'm grateful too," Sarah said, "for all of it, even the hard parts, especially the hard parts." As night fell and the pool lights came on, regular lights now, nothing controversial about them, Sarah felt the satisfaction of knowing that the worst moment of her life had somehow become the catalyst for something genuinely good. The enemy had become a friend. The conflict had become understanding. The darkness had eventually led to light. The pool, that beautiful, simple pool that had started everything, was now exactly what it was meant to be, a place of joy, gathering, and peace.